I never thought my life would change at 65. All my days felt the same. Quiet mornings, lonely afternoons, and evenings filled with the sound of my own thoughts. I used to believe that by this age, life had already given everything it had to offer. Love, friendship, excitement, all behind me. But then one ordinary Thursday, everything I thought I knew about growing old was turned upside down. I was walking slowly through the small park near my home. The kind of park where benches sagged under decades of visitors and the flowers seemed to bloom for no one in particular. I had just returned from my weekly grocery run, my hands heavy with bags of vegetables and bread, when I noticed a group of women laughing near the fountain. Their laughter was light, musical, and unfamiliar. I stopped, almost afraid to intrude, but something about them pulled me in. Something whispered that maybe, just maybe, I still belonged somewhere. One of them looked up and caught my gaze. Her eyes were kind, sparkling, and warm, like sunlight slipping through morning mist. She smiled and nodded. I felt a strange warmth in my chest, a mix of surprise and curiosity. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel old. I felt noticed. I took a hesitant step closer, my grocery bags swinging at my side. "Hello," I said softly, almost unsure if my voice would be welcome. And then it happened. The laughter stopped, but not in a harsh way. It softened, and soon one of them, a lively woman with silver-streaked hair, said, "Hi there, you look like you could use a cup of tea." Just like that, without warning, my day began to feel different. I joined them on the grass, awkwardly settling among strangers who didn't feel like strangers at all. They asked about my life, my days, even the smallest details. What I like to cook, my favorite flowers, my favorite books, and I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't done in years. Stories that I thought were long forgotten came spilling out, and they listened, truly listened, as if every word mattered. I laughed more in that one afternoon than I had in months. Not the polite, quiet laugh that slips out in passing, but deep, genuine laughter that makes your cheeks ache and your chest feel light. I realized then how much I had missed this. Connection, shared joy, the simple magic of being part of something bigger than my quiet routine. That day, as the sun began to dip and the park's shadows stretched long across the paths, one of the women handed me a small, worn notebook. "Take it," she said, her smile gentle. "Write down what makes you happy. You might be surprised at what you find." I held it close, feeling a flutter of excitement and curiosity I hadn't felt in decades. And that's when I knew something had shifted. Something inside me had started to stir. A sense of anticipation, of possibility. Maybe life wasn't over at 65. Maybe it was just beginning. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to say this. If you're over 60, if you feel like your best days are behind you, or if you think it's too late to find joy, friendship, or even love, stay with me. Subscribe to Stories Her Heart Holds, because you'll see how one unexpected moment can change everything. The next morning, I woke up with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the sunrise over the quiet streets. My mind wandered back to the park, to the laughter, the notebooks, the smiles. Could it really be that simple? A group of strangers, a single invitation, and suddenly life felt alive again. I decided to take a small step. That week, I joined the women at the community center where they met. It was intimidating at first, walking into a room filled with chatter, warmth, and the sound of stories being shared. I hesitated at the doorway, feeling every ounce of my old, cautious self trying to hold me back. But then I saw her, the woman who first smiled at me in the park, waving me over. My heart gave a little jump, and I walked in. Every week after that became an adventure. I discovered hobbies I had long abandoned: painting, singing, even learning a bit of digital photography. I laughed at my own mistakes, clapped for others' successes, and slowly the threads of my old, quiet life began to weave into something new. Friendship blossomed, simple yet profound, and every day brought a new surprise. A joke shared, a story told, or a quiet moment of understanding with someone who had once been a stranger. And yet, even in this happiness, there was suspense, a gentle edge of the unknown. I kept wondering, could life truly give me more? Could I find love, not just friendship, at this stage of life? The thought both thrilled and terrified me. I had loved once, long ago, and the memory of heartbreak lingered like a shadow. Could I dare to hope again? One afternoon, the group invited me for a small picnic by the lake. Sunlight danced on the water, the breeze carried the scent of wildflowers, and laughter echoed off the hills. I sat quietly, observing when a man approached. He wasn't imposing, not particularly striking, but there was a gentle warmth in his smile. He greeted everyone, paused, and then said, "It's good to see new faces joining us. I'm Michael." My heart skipped, not with panic, but with that subtle thrill you feel when the world suddenly seems bigger than you expected. Could this be the start of something new? Little did I know that picnic would mark the beginning of a journey that would bring love, deeper friendships, and an unexpected peace I had never imagined possible. At 65, life had opened a door I had long assumed was closed, and I was about to step through it, one hesitant, joyful step at a time. The next few weeks felt like waking from a long, dusty sleep. Every morning, I found myself looking forward to the community center, to seeing the same warm faces that had welcomed me in the park. There was a thrill in knowing that laughter, stories, and small adventures waited just around the corner. I had expected nothing, yet here I was, stepping into a world I had almost forgotten existed. At first, it was awkward. I tripped over my words, poured tea clumsily, and accidentally mixed up names more than once. I worried the women and men there might find me silly or slow. But each time, their reactions surprised me. They laughed with me, never at me, and shared stories of their own mistakes and triumphs. It was a revelation. I wasn't invisible. I belonged. There was Margaret, a fiery woman with curly gray hair who loved to tease everyone relentlessly. Her jokes were sharp but kind, and she had this uncanny ability to make you feel braver than you believed yourself to be. Then there was Thomas, quiet, soft-spoken, with a shy smile that seemed to say, "I understand," even when no one else does. Every person I met became a thread in this new tapestry of life, and slowly, my days started filling with color again. We shared more than conversation. We discovered hobbies and talents we had buried under the weight of years. I took up painting again, a brush trembling in my hand as I tried to capture the sunlight dancing through the windows of the center. Margaret insisted on adding her own bold strokes beside mine, turning my careful lines into something vivid and alive. Thomas encouraged me to join in on small poetry readings, his gentle voice guiding me when I stumbled. Each activity, each shared laugh was a small victory over the loneliness I had carried for so long. And yet, beneath the warmth, there was a quiet suspense. I kept asking myself if this joy was real, if it would last. I had lived long enough to know how quickly happiness could slip away. Sometimes, as I walked home alone under the soft glow of streetlights, I would wonder if I had imagined the warmth, if I would wake up tomorrow and find myself back in the same empty routine. But every smile, every shared story reassured me this was real. One rainy afternoon, we decided to try a small cooking class together. The kitchen smelled of garlic and fresh herbs, laughter bouncing off the walls as we chopped, stirred, and occasionally set things on fire by accident. I watched Margaret toss vegetables into a pan with the kind of confidence I had forgotten existed in the world. Thomas quietly stirred a pot of sauce, glancing at me every so often with a gentle, encouraging nod. For the first time in years, I felt part of something bigger than myself. It wasn't just the activities or the laughter. It was the comfort of knowing someone would notice if I didn't show up, the simple reassurance that I mattered. One day, after a painting session, I sat with my notebook open, writing small reflections about the day. I laughed until my cheeks hurt. I feel like I've known these people forever, yet I've only just met them. Is this what it feels like to belong again? Even with the joy, moments of suspense crept in. There were times when I felt insecure, comparing myself to younger women, wondering if I could ever truly fit in. Would they accept me fully? With my past, my mistakes, my quiet loneliness. Each doubt was a shadow, but slowly I began to recognize them for what they were, fear trying to keep me from happiness. I learned to face it step by step, day by day. One rainy evening, Margaret suggested we take a small walk to the nearby lake. The sunset painted the sky in fiery oranges and pinks, reflecting in the water like liquid gold.
We walked slowly, talking, laughing, and sharing memories. At one point, I paused, letting the cool breeze brush my face, and realized I had not felt this peaceful in decades. I was surrounded by laughter, by kindness, by people who genuinely cared. And yet, there was a thrill in the unknown. What more could life have in store? Could this newfound friendship lead to something even more beautiful? Then came the day we organized a small picnic for the group. Everyone brought something: sandwiches, fruit, pastries, a little cake with candles, because Margaret insisted on celebrating life at every turn. We spread blankets under an old oak tree and shared stories, some funny, some touching. Thomas told a story about a childhood adventure that made us all laugh until our sides hurt. Margaret recounted a mischievous prank she had pulled decades ago, and even I shared a little tale from my past, something I hadn't spoken aloud in years. It was during that picnic, with sunlight filtering through the leaves and a gentle breeze tugging at the blankets, that I felt the first true stirrings of something more. Not yet love, not yet longing, but a quiet curiosity, a spark that maybe life had surprises still waiting for me. I caught myself stealing glances at Thomas more than once, noticing how his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his laughter was soft yet sincere. A part of me wondered if perhaps at this stage of life, one could feel that fluttering, tentative excitement of the heart again. By the end of the afternoon, I felt something I thought impossible: hope. Hope that life wasn't finished at 65, that friendship could bloom late, and perhaps love could too. The suspense lingered, not a shadow, but a gentle tension, a question: what could come next? Every smile, every shared joke, every gentle word seemed to whisper, "Your story isn't over yet." Walking home that evening, the streets glistening from the afternoon rain, I felt lighter than I had in years. I realized that the simplest moments, tea shared, brushes in hand, laughter echoing, were shaping something far bigger than I could have imagined. My heart was opening, slowly, carefully, but fully enough to believe that life had more surprises for me yet. And as I closed my door that night, notebook in hand, I made a small promise to myself. I would embrace whatever came next, without fear, without hesitation. I would not let doubt steal the joy that had returned to me. I didn't know what awaited: perhaps more friendships, perhaps love, perhaps even a peace I had never known. But I was ready. For the first time in decades, I truly felt alive.
Life had begun to feel like a story I was eager to live page by page. I woke each morning with a strange mix of excitement and nervousness, wondering what the day might bring. Even simple things, walking to the community center, brewing my morning tea, carried a quiet thrill. The world seemed brighter, fuller, and somehow more alive than it had in years. That week, Margaret convinced me to join a small art workshop she had been attending for months. "Come on," she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "It's never too late to discover a hidden talent." I hesitated. Painting had once been a comfort, a secret joy I had long abandoned. What if I had forgotten everything? What if my hands trembled too much, my mind was too slow, and I looked foolish in front of everyone? But there was something about Margaret's energy that made fear feel like a challenge I wanted to meet. The studio was warm and fragrant, filled with the scent of paint, turpentine, and old wood. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching flecks of color on the floor like tiny sparks of possibility. I took a deep breath and joined the group. They greeted me with laughter and kindness, and for a moment, I allowed myself to simply exist in the space, without judgment or expectation. As I dipped my brush into the first vibrant colors, my heart pounded. The first strokes were hesitant, awkward. I glanced around at the others, all absorbed in their work, and felt that familiar, small surge of doubt. But Thomas, quietly seated nearby, gave me a gentle nod.
"Just follow your heart," he whispered. I smiled at him, surprised by the warmth in his voice. There was a gentle suspense in the air. Would I remember how to create beauty, and would I dare to try? Hours passed like minutes. The brush glided, colors danced, mistakes became part of the pattern, and I found myself laughing at my own clumsy attempts. Margaret peeked over my shoulder, grinning. "See, you've still got it." Her words felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Thomas offered quiet encouragement now and then, sharing a small tip or a thoughtful suggestion, and I realized something. I was learning again. Not just painting, but courage, patience, and the simple joy of trying something new. It wasn't just art that brought life back to me. I started attending small walks, book discussions, and even a short cooking class, each day filled with small discoveries. There was a suspense in every new experience, a question hanging in the air. Could I still surprise myself? Could I still find joy in places I had long assumed were behind me? Every yes I found whispered gently to my soul. The world still had wonders, even for someone who had lived 6.5 decades. And then, amidst the laughter and shared stories, I began noticing him more. Thomas. At first, I thought it was my imagination. The way he smiled when I made a silly mistake, the quiet attentiveness he showed during the painting class, the way he seemed to understand things about me without words. It was subtle at first, like a flicker of light at dawn, but impossible to ignore. My heart started fluttering in ways it hadn't in decades. One afternoon, after a particularly long session of painting, Thomas and I found ourselves lingering outside the studio, watching the sun dip low over the rooftops. The sky was a canvas of orange, pink, and purple, reflecting in his calm, thoughtful eyes. I felt a strange nervousness, a suspense I hadn't felt in years, and yet it was thrilling. He spoke softly, almost as if afraid to break the quiet magic. "You've got a gift, and more than that, you've got courage. I admire that." I laughed, nervously, brushing a stray strand of hair behind my ear. Courage? I'm just trying not to spill paint everywhere. But inside, something stirred, a warmth that grew quietly but surely, spreading like sunlight in my chest. Could it be possible to feel this way at 65? Was it real or just a fleeting illusion created by the joy of new friendships? The suspense of the unknown lingered, teasing me, daring me to hope. The days that followed were a delicate balance of discovery and suspense. Each class, each meeting brought tiny joys, the brushstrokes that surprised me, the laughter that filled the room, the quiet, understanding glances shared between Thomas and me. And yet, underneath it all was the question I couldn't shake. Could my heart truly open again after so many years of caution, loneliness, and careful self-protection? Then came a rainy afternoon that changed everything. We had planned a small indoor gathering, tea and stories by the fire. Outside, the rain drummed gently on the windows, a soft, rhythmic lullaby. Inside, the room glowed with warmth, chatter, and the smell of fresh pastries. I was telling a story about a childhood memory when Thomas leaned slightly closer, and for a brief, suspended moment, our hands brushed. Electricity, gentle but undeniable, ran through me. My heart raced, a mix of joy and suspense, and I realized I was allowing myself to feel again. That night, as I walked home under the rhythmic drizzle, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in decades. The world seemed fuller, brighter, and somehow more magical. I had discovered the joy of learning again, the thrill of new friendships, and the delicate stirrings of a possibility I had long thought impossible. Love. The suspense of what might come next hung in the air, like the scent of rain, intoxicating and irresistible. I opened my notebook that evening, the pages blank yet full of potential. I wrote slowly, carefully, capturing every emotion. The laughter, the surprise, the warmth of being seen, the flutter of my heart at Thomas's presence. I didn't know life could still feel this full. I didn't know my heart could still race. I didn't know happiness could return at 65. But here it is, waiting for me, and I'm ready to embrace it. For the first time, I realized life doesn't have an expiration date for joy. Every new experience, every shared smile, every gentle touch carried a promise it's never too late to discover wonder, friendship, and love. The suspense wasn't something to fear. It was a signal that life was alive, that anything could happen, and that I was ready to embrace it all. And so, as the rain tapped gently on my window, I made another quiet promise to myself. I would not shy away from this new chapter. I would step boldly into the unknown, guided by friendship, laughter, and the quiet hope of love.
I didn't tell anyone at first. Not Margaret, not the women at the center, not even my notebook knew everything yet. But something had changed inside me. I could feel it in the way my heart beat a little faster when I walked into the room, in the way my eyes searched for one familiar face without meaning to. I was trying to act normal, but at 65, your heart does not lie very well. Thomas and I began talking more, not loudly, not dramatically, but in those quiet spaces between activities. We sat next to each other during painting sessions. We walked side by side after meetings, never rushing, never forcing conversation. Silence between us felt easy, like an old song you don't need to remember the words to. One morning, I arrived early and found him already there, arranging chairs. He looked up and smiled, and for a moment, the room felt smaller, warmer. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I was hoping you'd come early today." That simple sentence stayed with me all morning. No one had hoped for my presence in a long time. We worked together that day, setting up supplies, wiping tables, laughing when we mixed things up. At one point, he handed me a cup of tea. Our fingers touched again, just for a second, but this time neither of us pulled away too quickly. There was a pause, a quiet one, the kind that carries meaning. I went home that afternoon feeling light, but also uneasy. Happiness can be scary when you've lived without it for too long. Part of me whispered, "Be careful. Don't imagine too much. Don't get hurt again." I had loved once before. I had trusted deeply, and I had learned how painful loss could be. Was I strong enough to open that door again? Days passed, and the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. Thomas started saving a seat for me. He remembered small things I mentioned, like how I liked my tea, or which colors I avoided when painting. These were not grand gestures, but they felt big to me. They felt thoughtful. They felt kind. One afternoon, he asked if I wanted to take a walk after the session. Just a short one, he said. The weather was mild, the sky soft and pale, like it was holding its breath. We walked slowly along the path near the lake, the sound of water gentle and steady beside us. For a while, we talked about small things, books, music, places we had once dreamed of visiting. Then, without warning, he stopped walking. He looked at the water, then at me. "Can I ask you something?" he said. My heart tightened. I nodded. "Do you ever feel like life gave you more time than you expected?" he asked, "and you're not sure what to do with it?" The question surprised me. It was honest, deep. I took a breath. "Yes," I said, "every day lately." He smiled, not wide, but warm. "Me too." That moment stayed with me long after we went home. It wasn't romance in the way movies show it. No dramatic music, no sudden confessions. Just two people standing by a lake admitting that they were still here, still feeling, still hoping. But with that hope came fear. I started noticing my doubts again. What if I was misreading everything? What if he only saw me as a friend? What if I was setting myself up for disappointment? Late at night, these thoughts crept in, quiet but persistent. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if peace and love were things I could truly hold on to. Margaret noticed before I said anything. She always did. One day, while we were cleaning brushes, she leaned over and whispered, "You're glowing, and don't tell me it's the lighting."
I laughed, embarrassed. Am I that obvious? She smiled softly. Only to someone who's been paying attention. I didn't deny it. Saying it out loud felt too real, too risky. But deep down, I knew something important was happening, not just with Thomas, but within me. I was letting myself be seen again. I was letting myself feel again. The next week, the group planned a small evening gathering. Nothing fancy, just dinner, music, and stories. I spent more time than usual choosing what to wear, not because I wanted to impress, but because I wanted to feel like myself, the version of me that had been quietly waiting to return. When I arrived, Thomas was there already. He looked surprised when he saw me, in the best way. "You look lovely," he said simply. No exaggeration, no pressure, just honesty. We sat together that evening, sharing food and laughter. At one point, music began to play softly in the background. Someone joked about dancing, and before I could stop myself, I stood up. My heart pounded as I offered my hand to Thomas. "Care to try?" I asked. He hesitated for a second, then took my hand. We moved slowly, awkwardly at first, then more comfortably. It wasn't perfect, we missed steps, we laughed, but in that moment, surrounded by friends and gentle music, I felt something settle inside me. Peace. Not the quiet of loneliness, but the calm of connection. After the music faded, we stepped outside for air. The night was cool, the sky faint but steady above us. Thomas looked at me, his expression thoughtful. He said, "I'm glad you're here, in my life, in this moment." I didn't answer right away, I just smiled, because sometimes the most important feelings don't need many words. As I walked home later that night, I realized something powerful. Love doesn't arrive loudly at this age. It comes gently, respectfully. It waits until you're ready, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I might be. Still, the question remained, was this the beginning of something real or just a beautiful moment in time? I didn't know yet, but I knew this much. My heart was open, and whatever came next, I would face it with courage.
Happiness has a strange way of waking old fears. The more peaceful my days became, the louder my doubts tried to speak. I didn't notice it at first. It started quietly, like a soft knock on the door of my mind. A question here, a worry there. By the time I realized it, those thoughts were sitting beside me, asking if I really deserved this calm joy. Thomas and I continued spending time together, but I found myself watching his expressions more closely. Was his smile the same for everyone? Did his kindness mean more to me than it did to him? I hated that I was thinking this way, yet I couldn't stop. When you have lived a life where love once left scars, your heart learns to protect itself too well. One afternoon, I arrived at the center and didn't see him right away. The room felt different, quieter. I tried to focus on painting, but my brush felt heavy in my hand. Margaret noticed. She always did. "You all right?" she asked softly. I nodded, but the truth stayed behind my eyes. I was afraid. Afraid that I had imagined everything, afraid that this gentle closeness was only temporary, afraid that one day he would simply stop showing up. Later that week, Thomas missed a meeting. No message, no explanation. I told myself not to overthink it, but my mind refused to listen. Old memories surfaced, being left waiting, being forgotten, being replaced by something or someone more important. That night, I barely slept. The next day, I almost didn't go to the lake walk. I felt foolish, like a woman chasing a dream that wasn't meant for her. But something inside me said, go. Even if it hurts, go. He was there, sitting on the bench, looking tired, his shoulders slightly slumped. When he saw me, relief crossed his face. "I was hoping you'd come," he said quickly. I wanted to explain. We walked slowly, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, he spoke. He told me about his sister, about her illness, about how fear had pulled him away for a few days. He spoke honestly, without excuses, and as he talked, I felt my chest loosen, not because the fear was gone, but because truth had replaced silence.
"I should have told you," he said. "I didn't want to bring heaviness into something that feels good." That word stayed with me. Good. I realized then that my fear wasn't about him disappearing. It was about me believing that good things don't last, that peace is fragile, that love always comes with a cost. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote until my hand ached. I wrote about the woman I used to be, the one who gave everything and lost herself in the process. I wrote about the years I spent protecting my heart so tightly that nothing could get in. And then I wrote something new. I am allowed to be happy without apology. The next few weeks tested me in small but meaningful ways. I had moments where I wanted to pull back, to keep things light and distant. But every time I felt that urge, I chose honesty instead. I chose presence. I chose to stay. Thomas noticed too. One evening, as we cleaned up after a gathering, he said, "You feel closer lately, more here." His voice held no pressure, only warmth. "I'm trying," I admitted. "It's not easy." He nodded. "Nothing worth having ever is." Those words settled deep inside me. Margaret later pulled me aside and smiled. "You know," she said, "peace isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing calm even when fear knocks." I carried that with me. There were still quiet moments of doubt, nights when the past whispered too loudly. But there were also mornings filled with laughter, shared coffee, and gentle touches that reminded me I was not alone anymore. I began to understand something important. Love at this age isn't loud or demanding. It doesn't rush. It waits. It listens. It grows slowly, like roots finding their way through hard soil. And I was growing too, not just toward Thomas, but toward myself. One evening, standing by my window watching the sunset paint the sky in soft gold, I felt something I hadn't in decades. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had stopped running from joy. I had stopped questioning whether I deserved it. I was learning that love doesn't erase fear. It teaches you how to walk beside it. And as I closed my notebook that night, I knew the hardest part wasn't falling in love. It was finally believing I was worthy of it. Something shifted after that. Not in a dramatic way, no sudden promises or big declarations, just a calm settling, like dust finally resting after a long storm. My days began to feel balanced, lighter. I still had worries, still had memories, but they no longer ruled me. Thomas and I fell into an easy rhythm. We didn't need to plan every moment. Sometimes we met for coffee. Sometimes we just walked. Sometimes we sat in comfortable silence watching the world move around us. And somehow that felt like enough. The group noticed the change too. Laughter came easier. Conversations felt deeper. Even the air around us seemed warmer. We celebrated small things now. A finished painting, a new recipe that actually worked, someone's birthday marked with candles and off-key singing. One afternoon, the center organized a small outing to a nearby town. Nothing fancy, just a bus ride, a shared lunch, and time together. I almost didn't go. Old habits still whispered that staying home was safer, but I went anyway. The ride was filled with stories and laughter. Margaret teased everyone. Someone passed around homemade cookies. I sat beside Thomas, our shoulders touching lightly as the road curved ahead. I watched the scenery roll by and realized something simple and powerful. I was happy. Not the kind that bursts loudly and fades quickly. The kind that stays. The kind that breathes with you. At lunch, we sat outside under open sky. Thomas raised his glass and said, "To second chances." Everyone smiled. I felt a quiet lump in my throat. Later that day, as we walked through a small market, I lagged behind, distracted by a stall selling old notebooks. Thomas noticed and waited. "You like writing," he said. "I do," I replied. "It helps me understand myself." He nodded. "You do that well. You listen to yourself." No one had ever said that to me before. Back home, life continued with its gentle rhythm. Mornings filled with light, evenings with reflection. Some days were slow, some were joyful, and a few were hard, but I no longer faced them alone. One morning, I woke up feeling unwell. Nothing serious, just the reminder that my body had lived many years. For a moment, fear returned. The old thought, what if time runs out? Before I could spiral, my phone rang. Thomas. "I was thinking about you," he said. "Can I bring you soup?" I laughed softly. That sounds perfect. He arrived with a warm container and a shy smile. We sat at my small table, talking quietly. No pressure, no sadness, just care. That day taught me something important. Love at this age is not about promises far away. It's about showing up now. As weeks passed, peace grew stronger. I found joy in routines, watering plants, writing in my notebook, sharing meals. Even doing nothing together felt meaningful. One evening, the group gathered to celebrate another birthday. Candles flickered, music played softly. Someone pulled me into a slow dance. I laughed, a little embarrassed, a little proud. I caught Thomas watching me, smiling. Later, as the night cooled, we stepped outside. The sky was clear, the moon calm and steady above us. "I never thought life could feel like this again," I said quietly. He answered without hesitation, "Me neither, but I'm glad it does." There was no need to say more. I walked home that night feeling grounded, not floating, not afraid, just here. For so many years, I thought happiness had an age limit, that love belonged to the young, that peace came only after everything else was gone. I was wrong. Peace came when I stopped fighting life and started living it again. And as I closed my notebook that night, I knew the hardest part wasn't falling in love. It was finally believing I was worthy of it. By now, my life no longer felt like something I was waiting to escape from. It felt like a place I belonged. The days moved with purpose, even when nothing special happened. That surprised me the most. Happiness didn't need an event anymore. It lived in the ordinary. The community center felt like a second home. People noticed when I arrived. They called my name, they asked how I was, and they truly waited for the answer. I had not realized how much that mattered until it became part of my life. Thomas and I didn't label what we were. There was no rush to define it. What we shared grew naturally. We showed up for each other, we laughed, we listened, we held space for silence when words were unnecessary. One afternoon, Margaret organized a small celebration just because, she said, life deserved it. We decorated the room with paper flowers and soft lights. Someone brought a radio, and music filled the space, slow and comforting. I watched the people around me, faces lined with years, eyes filled with stories. These were not just friends, they were companions on a road we had all traveled differently, yet somehow together. During the celebration, Thomas took my hand and led me to the side. "There's something I want to tell you," he said, his voice steady but serious. My heart tightened, not with fear, but with awareness. I listened. "I spent many years thinking my best moments were behind me," he said. "Meeting you changed that." I didn't interrupt. I let the moment breathe. "You remind me that life doesn't close doors. We do," he continued, "and I'm grateful you opened yours." I felt warmth rise in my chest. Not overwhelming, just right. "I'm grateful too," I said, and I meant it with my whole heart. Later that evening, as laughter echoed and music softened, I realized something important. Love at this age doesn't take anything away from you. It adds, it deepens, it makes space for who you already are. The group became our anchor. We celebrated holidays together, shared meals, supported each other through small worries and quiet fears. No one felt left behind. One morning, we organized a small volunteer project. Nothing big, just helping clean a park. I worked alongside friends, my hands busy, my heart full. A woman beside me smiled and said, "I hope I'm this happy at your age." I laughed gently. So did I. That day stayed with me. As time passed, Thomas and I began spending more time at each other's homes. We cooked simple meals, shared books, watched old films. There was no pressure to be anything other than ourselves. One quiet evening, as we sat by the window watching the rain, he said, "I feel at peace when I'm with you." I thought about it, then nodded. Me too. And that was enough. I realized then that peace was not something I needed to search for anymore. It was already here, in shared moments, in friendships, in love that didn't ask me to change. The woman I used to be, the one who felt invisible, felt far away now, not erased, just healed. I had found a life that fit me, and for the first time, I didn't fear the future. I welcomed it.
These days, I wake up without rushing. The morning light enters my room softly, like it knows I am no longer afraid of time. I sit by the window with my tea and watch the world begin again. Cars pass, birds gather, life moves forward, and so do I. At 65, I no longer measure my days by what I have lost. I measure them by what I have found. Love found me quietly. Friendship held me steadily. Peace settled in when I finally stopped questioning whether I deserved happiness. Thomas and I still take our walks. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we don't. Our steps fall into rhythm, and that feels like its own kind of conversation. There is comfort in knowing someone is beside you, not because they need you, but because they choose you. The community center remains the heart of my week. We celebrate small joys there. We hold each other during hard days. We laugh often. There is no pretending, no pressure, just people being human together. One afternoon, as I watched a new woman walk in, hesitant and unsure, I recognized myself in her. I smiled and waved her over. She looked surprised, then relieved. As she sat beside me, I felt a quiet pride. I had become someone who belonged. Later that evening, Thomas and I cooked dinner together. We moved easily around the kitchen, passing dishes, sharing small jokes. He looked at me and said, "You know, you've changed my life." I shook my head gently. We changed each other. And that was the truth. The past still exists, it always will, but it no longer defines me. My story did not end where I thought it did. It waited, patiently, for me to be ready. I write in my notebook often now, not to heal pain, but to capture joy. Pages filled with moments I once thought I'd never experience again. There is no loud happiness here, no dramatic ending, just peace, and it is enough. If you are listening to this and feel like life has passed you by, let me tell you something gently. It hasn't. It's waiting in small places, in unexpected faces, in moments you almost say no to. Say yes. Love doesn't ask your age. Friendship doesn't care about your past. Peace arrives when you allow yourself to receive it. I found all three after 65, and if it can happen for me, it can happen for you too.